If you've been around at all in TF2, you will know about a type of item called Taunts. These Taunts are basically an animation that you can activate and watch your character do, and they're all pretty much designed to fit that class's character. You obviously have Taunts that you can do by yourselves, there's partner Taunts, and there's big group Taunts, meaning your whole team can get involved. But there is another aspect to them that you've also probably seen, and those are the unusual versions of these taunts. These work just the same way as regular taunts already in the game, but when you activate them, a particle effect also plays along the taunt animation. These unusual taunts were added way back in 2014 with the Love and War update, and you are only available to get them from the Audition and Director's Cut Real cases, or you can trade for them. So unboxing unusual taunts back in 2014 worked basically the same way that unusual hats still do. You see the taunt, you see the purple text telling you that it's an unusual, and then you see what effect you got. At the time, the best effect was Screaming Tiger, and if you got that on a Conga taunt back in the day, you were sitting on something that ends up costing quite a lot of money. Nowadays not so much, but we'll get onto why that happened in a minute. You just need to know that unusual taunts used to be used as a status symbol the same way unusual hats did. If you had a really high tier unusual taunt, people really cared, especially when they first came out. And for a while, they were a big part of the trading scene. Admittedly, this was when I was still trading, and learning prices of them when they were so new was really scary, and I didn't know how to price check, so I tended to stay away from them for the most part. Well, I stayed away from them at least when it came to trading. I bought a few of them that I knew I'd probably want to keep and use all of the time, but other than that, I stayed away from them. But there were always something special to see when you did see them in a TF2 match. And for a while, unusual taunts seemed to pretty much stay the same. That was until Scream Fortress 2016, nearly 2 years after unusual taunts were added into TF2. Valve decided to add an item into TF2 called the Unusualifier. Now this item basically allowed you to get a normal version of any taunt in the game at that point and use it with their Unusualifier to make yourself, an unusual version of that taunt. And for the casual player who only maybe unboxes a certain few crates, doesn't like trading at all or anything like that, this was amazing. There was finally a chance for other people to get their hands on something that seemed super exclusive up until this point. But that's where the problems for unusual taunts actually started. Before we get too deep into this, let me just explain to you the simple concept of supply and demand. Now this basically means how much of something exists versus how much people want to buy that same thing. So for TF2 items, for example, you could say how many unusual Burning Flames team captains exist versus how many people want to buy them. Since there aren't a lot of Burning Flames team captains knocking about, the people who own them know they can basically charge whatever they want because there's such a large amount of people fighting to try and get their hands on one. Meaning the large demand has to fight for the small supply, meaning that small supply becomes very expensive. Now let's flip the scenario over. So if you took a hat that was in high supply, like a Nuts and Bolts bombing run, which used to be the low tier hat everyone wanted to start their unusual trading with, the demand for that is honestly a lot lower, because it's just not quite a Burning Flames team captain. And it means the price of all of these items, because there's not many people wanting to buy it, but there's so many of them that exist, you have to bring the price down so the people who are potentially looking at buying one actually feel like it's worth it. Now, this maybe wasn't the best explanation. I mean, I did business studies in GCSEs, but they were a while ago now. But you get the point. If an item is rare, then people really want it and they will pay a lot for it. If an item is not so rare, then the price comes down because not too many people are trying to buy it. Now, apply that theory to unusual taunts. Before 2016, there weren't many unusual taunts about, so the supply of them was fairly low, but people still really wanted to get a bunch of them for their collections and loadouts, and just to kind of have them, which meant that the demand for these unusual taunts was still very high, making the prices of unusual taunts quite high as well. Especially for like the Screaming Tiger effect, and all of the other higher tier effects as well. Now enter in Unusualifiers, which allow anybody who unboxes them to make their own unusual taunt. What do you think happens there? Well, all of a sudden, unusual taunts aren't so special anymore, and every single person has a chance to get them and make them themselves. That therefore shoots the supply of unusual taunts way up, and the demand for them comes crashing down because everybody who wanted them before has now been able to actually get them. And as the demand comes crashing down, so does the price. If you look at the backpack.tf price suggestions for the Screaming Tiger Conga taunt, you will see that about 7 years ago, these got price suggested at 420 to 500 keys, which was around $740 to $880 for one unusual taunt. And it is sold for that as well. The reason the price suggestion went through is because somebody actually sold it for that price. Whereas if you look at the price of it now, it is only worth 19 to 23 keys. Meaning the highest price for it that you're probably going to get going off backpack.tf prices is $40. And this happened for almost every single unusual taunt you can go back and find. You'll see the prices before this update were really high. And if you look at them now, they're really low, and you can pick some unusual taunts up now for like a few dollars. Granted, they're not the highest tier ones, but they're still pretty good. So anyone who did own a load of unusual taunts before this happened ended up losing hundreds, potentially even thousands and thousands of dollars. For everyone who didn't have one before, well, they're happy and they can get unusual taunts for cheap now. I think I maybe had a couple in my inventory when the big drop happened, but because I was quite careful about getting them anyway, and I was slowly getting out of trading at that point, I didn't get hit too hard when this drop happened, but I do still feel bad for all those people losing out because Valve added an item that nobody saw coming. And that kind of got me wondering, what if Valve added another type of unusualifier? I tweeted this a while ago asking more about what would happen if Valve added a weapon unusualifier, but I think even without that tweet, it would have been obvious that this would also kill the prices of pretty much every single weapon skin in the game right now. That would obviously be really, really cool for people who don't have them and can't get them, but it would be devastating for the people who do, especially because a lot of unusual weapon skins in the game right now are ridiculously expensive. More expensive than the Conga ever got. So in the long run, I'm not sure it's worth it. I would still like to see more unusual weapons get added into the game at some point though. It is Valve we're talking about here, so that's never going to happen, but it's nice to hope. What do you lot think about taunt unusualifiers? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you want to see them on more things? Let me know.